A man is lying down in a metro station. No one really cares. He may be dead, but no one cares anyway. No one but a few passers-by who carry him over to the side and go away right after. They know he's not dead. They know it's okay to lie down in a metro, sometimes even impossible not to, in this stifling late Soviet atmosphere. The shot is from the 1989 film The Asthenic Syndrome, directed by the Ukrainian filmmaker Kira Muratova. Muratova is probably one of the most important directors in Soviet and post-Soviet cinema. In her films, she managed to combine the absurdity of everyday existence with an absolutely groundbreaking stylistic approach towards making cinema. Her films gloom with hopelessness, and yet they make you laugh as hard as you can at that hopelessness. Take The Asthenic Syndrome, for example. This film captures perfectly the paralytic years of Soviet rule, where the whole country was a disease and no one could do anything to avoid that disease. The title of the film gives a hint as to what the disease is. It's asthenia, the disease of weakness and powerlessness. Muratova described it as a condition of nervous exhaustion, resulting in inappropriate behavior or lack of effect. The film starts with a shot of a fully packed garbage can. The things inside are very indicative of complete and irreversible loss. There is a doll resembling the pictures of abandoned kindergartens from Chernobyl, where there are no more children to play with them. There are half-withered flowers in front of a concrete wall, suggesting a slow decay of nature, and to top it all, there is a no longer needed clock, as if showing that time no longer exists in this story that hasn't even started yet. But the next shot strikes us with a classic Muratovan irony. Three women repeat a phrase completely out of sync. What they are saying is at its core the Soviet belief that literature has a decisive role in the moral upbringing of the people. In the USSR there was even a saying that the writer is the engineer of the human soul. Muratova deconstructs this view. She shows that nothing could be more wrong than what these women are saying, and no literature was in fact able to help them or anyone in the country. In one of her interviews she was saying, "If I believed that art is capable of re-educating, of changing the world, then I perhaps would have given it up so that many people would have seen the film and been re-educated. But I'm not out to re-educate, I only aim to reflect." These two scenes set the backdrop for the story, showing that the tragic and the ironic exist side by side in Muratova's films. The actual story begins with another tragedy, a man getting buried and a woman by the name of Natasha mourning his death. She completely loses her mind over it. Literally, she becomes crazy and aggressive towards other people, loses her job and wanders around the city doing apparently nothing. She gets on a tram on the very last station, only to get off when the tram turns around and reaches the first station. Here Muratovan irony strikes us again, as we find out Natasha is a doctor, and yet she falls ill herself and starts hurting other people as well. But after around 40 minutes of her aimless existence, we understand that it was all just a film within the film. We get a glimpse of hope that the rest of the movie would be any different, or at least not so depressing. Which is just wrong. To begin with, the first thing we see before us is two red carnations in a vase, and in the post-Soviet countries these flowers are used for one and only occasion: you put them on top of a grave. And then the people in the audience are outraged at the film itself. Almost no one wants to stay for a talk and a meeting with the lead actor after the film. Some guy says, "What the hell? I'm already tired as I am, and now I gotta watch this?" The only people who actually stayed in the cinema hall are a detachment of soldiers who've obviously been commanded to sit and listen, and one other man who stayed for one simple reason: he fell asleep. Just as Natasha, this man suffers from the asthenic syndrome that makes him powerless. He's a teacher of English, and yet all he teaches are Soviet slogans translated into Russian.
Full education in our country is free, compulsory, and universal.
The students don't really like him. They can get into a fight with him, and he would do absolutely nothing about it. He seems tired. He may randomly stop at some place and stare at one point, apparently without a single thought in his head. He falls asleep all the time. He probably can't find a good reason to stay awake.
Я не люблю телефон, я не люблю музыку слушать, магнитофон. Я не люблю сидеть за столиком, пить кофе и жаловаться на жизнь. Я не люблю закуривать, я не люблю курить, я не люблю красиво держать сигарету, я не люблю дым и так далее.
And at the end of the film, he falls asleep again, and this time it seems for the last time in his life. The story about the two people is basically just a frame for the movie to hold itself together, but there's so much more about this film and her other films that make them so special. One aspect is style. Muratova often experiments with editing to evoke an emotional response from the viewer. In that she is very similar to the directors of the French New Wave, who were starting their filmmakers' careers at about the same time as Muratova. Muratova, just as the French filmmakers, often tries to subvert our expectations from watching cinema. She would often add a cut where you wouldn't expect it, and she wouldn't make a cut specifically in a place where you would expect a film to have it. Let's take this shot from her film The Long Farewell, where a man is getting into an argument with another man, and the picture seems to be jumping in time, while the audio track is keeping its continuity. In one shot, the man is on one side of the woman, and then in the next shot, on the opposite side. Compare it to the shot from Godard's classic movie Breathless, where a man shoots a police officer in a very similar way. The audio track just plays as it normally would, but the video track jumps forward as if jumping in time. This technique called the jump cut is used in both cases to underline the aggressiveness of the situation, where things happen so fast you don't even notice. They subvert our expectation of the movie by breaking our understanding of temporal continuity. Then, in the next shot in Muratova's film, we have the opposite situation, where Muratova doesn't make a cut and instead circles around the characters to show them from the other side. Compare this again to this shot from Breathless, where a handheld camera continuously turns around to show what's happening. In both of these cases, the filmmaker kinda subverts our expectations because the fact of a handheld camera moving around emphasizes that there is an actual person behind the camera, and we as viewers associate ourselves with that person behind the camera. We no longer perceive events as something distant. It now seems as if we amateurs are holding that camera and looking around. One other thing about Kira Muratova's films is that they seem to be very distant from reality, almost surreal at times. Take this shot from her movie Brief Encounters, where we see a young woman looking right at us. After a while, there is a huge focus pull into the background, where two figures are walking down the road. In the next shot, we get to see them closely, and one of them is the young woman we just saw. How does it happen that the woman is in two places at the same time? Muratova seems to be showing that the woman is both present and very distant from her friend. Deep in her heart, she feels alienated, as if looking at herself from a huge distance. In the British documentary Women Make Film, there is an analysis of this shot by Muratova, and the speaker notices that in this shot there is a subtle hint of David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. But there is also a pretty big difference between Lynch and Muratova. While Lynch had to create his movies by getting the most out of his imagination, Muratova could do with going out and looking at the people around her. Her movies may seem surreal, but in fact they are very much rooted in the absurdity of Soviet and post-Soviet times. The Ukrainian critic Alexei Konyukh had a great remark on that. He wrote, "In Europe, Muratova's films are seen as a sort of surrealism. No one there would imagine that you could actually live this way. In Ukraine, as in Russia, these films are so realistic, they so honestly illuminate the contemporary situation of our existence that in their strange, often lunatic characters we stubbornly refuse to recognize ourselves and those around us." So, reality is what preoccupies Muratova the most. She tries to find total absurdity in real life and film it with a camera. One of the most striking episodes that shows it is about four women whom we are following for a very long time as they try to reach a certain place. Upon arrival, they start crying. We don't know why. We can only stare at them for a few minutes, guessing what it might be about. In another shot, we see what it was. It was an animal shelter with abandoned dogs that are probably going to be put down soon. After a few minutes of looking at them, we see a black and white title in the middle of the screen. It says, "People don't like to look at this, people don't like to think about this, this should have no relation to discussions about good and evil." This is obviously ironic. In one of her interviews, she explained that the irony is to say we are going to close our eyes and speak of good and evil to stop thinking about this. But after this abominable dog pound, the chatter about man as the great creature is demagoguery. All words, all philosophy are in vain. This episode shows Muratova as a great pessimist regarding the ability of culture and philosophy and mankind to deal with the actual problems of the world. Her worldview is that we humans are doomed not to notice evil and not pay attention to it. The idea of doom is probably key to all her films, and she actually found an original way to represent doom in cinema. Most of her films employ the technique of a broken record, where some episodes and discussions repeat 2, 3, or 4 times in a row as if people are trying to explain something in different ways, but they can't succeed. One example in the Astanek syndrome is the episode where a man tells his friend about some woman who got a snake in her stomach. Or not in her stomach, but in her heart or soul or whatever, and that snake is sucking energy out of her, kinda like a fixation, you know. What follows is an absurd conversation you should see for yourself.
Ну и что, змея? А как вы здесь оказались?
Я еду к Костоправу.
Серьезно? Замечательно, так я тоже еду к нему.
Да.
Ну и что, змея? А как вы здесь оказались?
Я еду к знахарю. Он здесь.
Repetitions like this, especially of similarly ridiculous conversations, create a feeling of some schizophrenic déjà vu. We've just seen the same episode, why is it repeated? They also make us understand the hopelessness of the world the characters live in. They get to hear the same phrases over and over again, apparently without noticing that these are the very same phrases. It is one of the most important messages Kira Muratova has to convey. The world is absurd because we've lost the ability to communicate with each other. In Secondary People, one of Muratova's later films, there is an episode of 2 women arguing over some noise from the outside. One woman is asking the other one not to rant that loudly, and what follows is a ridiculous dialogue of people not caring about anything but themselves.
Не кричіть так голосно. У мене дитина щойно заснула.
Ну, може, там когось убивають.
А мені начхати.
А мені начхати, що вам начхати?
А мені начхати.
А мені начхати, що вам
А мені
начхати?
начхати. Мене ваша думка не цікавить.
А мене не цікавить.
А мені начхати, що вас не цікавить.
А мені начхати, що вас не цікавить, що мене не цікавить. Мені начхати, що вам начхати, коли вам начхати, що мені
А
начхати.
мені начхати. Ха!
In Muratova's films, people just don't hear each other. They would say hello when another person says goodbye. In the middle of conversation, they would get mad because why is the other person even here? They would ask a question without ever listening to the answer.
Как тебе кажется, мне идет эта шляпа?
Очень.
А по-моему, идет.
In Muratova's films, this inability to communicate eventually leads to madness. Asylums and insane people appear in almost all of her films. Those are the people that have fallen out of the society, unable to find a place in it. But they aren't just a group of people confined in their asylums and having no relation to the outside world. Their insanity mirrors the thoughts and actions of other characters. Remember that ridiculous dialogue about the snake living in someone's stomach? That same story is told by this man in the asylum at the end of the film. Then another man from that same room is energetically quoting Gorbachev, the leader of the USSR at that time, and he later appears in another movie by Muratova where he tells us that in North America there had been a solar eclipse named after Karl Marx. Another madman, Misha, gives us a hint about the role of insanity here at the very end of the film. He casually shows us his album of things he has collected throughout his life, and among them are the closing credits of the movie itself. Everything that's happened in the movie turns out to be a play staged and directed by a lunatic. Kira Muratova shows us that there's no particular difference between his life and the lives of everyone else. It's just that some of us haven't been caught yet. Muratova's films aren't a comfortable watch. They're the exact opposite of that. They won't bring you pleasure or relaxation. They're likely to make you mad at times. But they allow us to look at ourselves as if from a distance, through an ironic, ridiculous, but always painfully convincing lens. And that, if anything, is the goal art has always been trying to achieve.